Hi everyone, Joe Cioffi here. I got my old Giants champion shirt on. Hope you had a great Sunday. It took almost all day for things to improve where I am. It was cloudy until late afternoon, and finally the sun came out for the last hour or two. And we're going to take a look at, guess what? We're looking at Irma, well, Irma, which is actually the way it should be pronounced, and I've been pronouncing it Irma on my TV work, but I kind of got away from it this week, and I guess I was a little bit lazy, but it's actually pronounced Irma. Anyhow, we have a reconnaissance aircraft going through doing passes right now. Even though Irma kind of has a bit of a distorted look on the satellite view, and that's being caused by some northerly shear, and we've got these, we've been watching this upper low out in the Atlantic, the one that's sitting northwest of Irma. It's still there, and it was forecast to get completely out of the way, and it never really did, but it's still there. And you also have another big upper low to the east, the northeast, and Irma's kind of sandwiched in between. One of the things, has a pretty well-developed core. One of the things that seemed to happen today, that it was moving west-southwest, and then for a few hours at least, it looked like it was moving straight west, and now it looks like it's moving southwest again. So this is going to be key. Hurricane watches are up for the northern Leeward Islands, and for the Virgin Islands, and perhaps even for the north coast of Puerto Rico. If you're in those two areas, I would keep in touch with the latest weather information to see how this plays, because the weather models kind of nudged a little bit further south again today in that area, and brings Irma perilously close to the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, particularly the Virgin Islands. So this motion that continues, or that has resumed to the southwest, is going to be critical with regards to the impact that will occur over the northern Leeward Islands. The European model in particular took a good chunk of that hurricane and passed it over those islands before it pulls away to the northeast and just skims the north coast of Puerto Rico. The center stays offshore, but the part of the circulation of Irma gets onto the North Shore coast, if that model is correct, and if this southern trend continues. So let's get this going, and we'll chat on the board with you and come back for a little Q&A afterward. Well, we can certainly say we're going to be having a lot of interesting times ahead watching Hurricane Irma. This has been really a very intense view of this particular hurricane. I've been spending a lot of time on learning a lot of things that I wasn't completely aware of, and on the other hand, also being able to exercise all these tools to try and figure this thing out. Now, here's the latest satellite picture. This is the latest satellite loop. We were seeing a west-southwest motion overnight. During the day today, the eye, for a few hours at least, looked like it was moving straight west. Now, in the last several hours on the loop, it looks like it's moving southwest, not even west-southwest, but more southwest, depending. It's hard to see where the center is because the eyes become obscured again. And it looks like Irma is undergoing some kind of reorganization of some sort, and there's a little bit of northerly shear going on as well. So this is all kind of playing havoc with the track and the intensity to some degree. One thing the Air Force recon found when it flew into Irma was that it was actually a bit stronger than what the satellite estimates were showing, and I'll show you the recon in just a second, but it looks like it's dropped down to about 17.3 north, maybe a little shade further south than that, and getting close to inside 50 west. And as we've been saying, the water temperatures in this area are extremely warm once it got west of 45. So it's right in here. It's getting into this pocket of it's in this pocket of 28 seawater, and it's very close to 29 seawater temperature. This is going to give it some juice, maybe, and the warmer water will probably compensate to some degree for whatever kind of northerly shear is going on. And when we look at the water vapor imagery, very interesting what's happening here. You've got two very large upper lows sitting out in the Atlantic, one in the eastern part of the Atlantic and the other one that's been forever to the northwest of Irma. As I said, it may be having just a little bit of impact on it, but you can see on the water vapor imagery, the core is well developed and it's definitely turned back down toward the southwest. And of course, this was very important. The further, as we've been saying, and I want to just reiterate the fact that the further southwest it gets, the greater the risk is going to be for the northern Leeward Islands and for the Virgin Islands and maybe even for the north coast of Puerto Rico. This upper low, the one that's to the northwest, has not been well forecasted by the models, and it is definitely a player here. So we're going to pay a close attention to what it does and what kind of impact it has on Irma in terms of the track, because you can see the motion here toward the southwest. The upper low is moving maybe toward the northwest very, very slowly. It doesn't look like it's really moved very much during this afternoon. So we're going to play, we pay attention to these things, and I think we're going to have to pay extra added attention with lieu of what's going on. So let's just show you real fast. I'm going to go to, these are the latest, this is the latest hurricane track model guidance. And sorry for the pause there, just wanted to get the distractions out of the way. And you can see that the track models, they've kind of shifted a shade further south. They skim the northern Leeward Islands. Most of the models do take it north of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic by a fair distance. And that west-northwest track continues until the hurricane settles itself. It actually plows through just about all of the Bahamas until the hurricane settles itself somewhere in the northwest Bahamas between 75 and 80 degrees west and in and around 23 to about 27 north. The models are all very well clustered. We have a couple of outliers, but the models all seem to be very well clustered here in the long-range period. So that's usually a good sign from the standpoint of having a higher degree of confidence through this entire ordeal. Now here's the recon flight, courtesy of Tropical Tidbits. It just went through its second pass, and you'll notice the white wind barbs here, indicative of winds of 96 to 113 knots. I'm trying to count all the barbs, but I really can't. There's just way too many of them. I'm trying to see whether it's closer to the 96 or the 113, but certainly these strong winds are measured. Now, I did see a tweet from Levi Cowan saying that the first pass was 958 millibars. The print on the map is 961. So let's see if there'll probably be eventually a second pressure that will pop out, and we will evaluate that. Now, let's take a look at the late afternoon models and see what's going on. And, a couple of things happened today with respect to the European. The European operational run now jumped back in the other direction and puts an out-to-sea solution on the table again. But I want to just kind of show you what's happening with the jet stream here that is causing this to happen. So here's our trough. Now we're looking at Friday morning here. So here's our trough in the east. Here's Irma. And here's that ridge that's oriented northeast, southwest, keeping Irma on that, west-northwest course, getting it toward the northwestern Bahamas and off the Florida coast. The trough is swinging around, and what happens is the upper trough, as we said, slowly begins to pull out, and the differences begin to show up over, believe it or not, to the north and east, up here, up near Newfoundland. This is where the European today, and I'll show you the comparison in a second, this is where the European, why the solution that the European came up with. The models seem to be digging a system from Newfoundland southward into the Atlantic. The action with the leftover troughing that hangs back in the Ohio and Tennessee Valley and down into the Mississippi Valley is still there on the GFS, and so it forms this upper low, tries to form some kind of upper low back in the southern Gulf states. And what happens is that the hurricane basically gets captured by that and attempts to pinwheel around it. The GFS shows the influence of this system on Irma because it erodes the ridge. So it begins to move northwest and north, and then on this run, it pinwheels it around the upper low that's sitting, the upper feature that's sitting back in the leftover troughing that's back in the central Gulf states, and pinwheels it around. And now on this particular one, it's back to bringing in a system near Wilmington in North Carolina. The system that's in Newfoundland starts to lift out. So all of the action is concentrated with what's left over back to its southwest. This in a way reminds me of Joaquin, where we had something similar, except that there were two things different. With Joaquin, we had the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida that apparently created enough troughing that Joaquin responded to that and wound up moving out to the northeast. We don't have a tropical storm out there, but we do have this upper trough that's sitting near Newfoundland. And when we look at the GFS, I'm going to do this again. You see how all the gears just time out in a certain way, and that trough pulls out. You get this leftover weakness troughing that extends back down into the central Gulf, and then the hurricane responds by rotating around it, getting captured by it and rotating around it, moving inland at Wilmington and then turning northwest and then westward, and then of course it goes to its ultimate demise. The European was the difference in the European is that the European today, and here we have it, and here's the European, it's much deeper with this, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. The European has been guilty these last number of months of over-amplifying these systems to some degree, but the European amplifies this much stronger than the GFS. So the ridge is gone, and what the European suggests is that this upper trough winds up exerting an influence on Irma by pulling it away to the northeast. And you can see that it gets almost to 79 west here, very close to the Florida coast, through the northwestern Bahamas. But at this point, it's this upper low that creates the weakness right in here, okay? And Irma is going to try and respond to that. It has that troughing hanging back. You looked at this when I first saw it as the model was coming out. I thought, well, this pulls away to the northeast, and this would respond to the troughing to its west and attempt to pinwheel around it. But because the European is so deep with this system that it has now just between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, that it basically pulls it out to the east. The question is whether is the European right with this look, or is the GFS and the Canadian, are they right? You see how much less deep the GFS is, and the Canadian a little deeper, but it's a little further along and leaves room for. It still has enough ridging in between that the weakness is not enough to pull Irma away to the northeast. And then you have the GFS. Also not nearly as deep. Remember, the cutoff on the European, the actual upper low on the European is sitting in the Gulf of Maine. The GFS has it way up in Labrador. So that's the primary difference. The models are similar in the strength of this system that drops into southeastern Canada that is going to be a player here if the models are correct. And I think the GFS late this afternoon responded to that by shifting everything a little bit further to the east, but it still wants to pinwheel everything northward. So let me go back now. Let's go back to where we are at the moment, which is right about there. And I'm going to put the surface. We'll use the 10-meter wind, and I'll go a little bit tighter here. And where we are, there we go, Western Atlantic. Okay, so Irma is now coming into the view here, and there it is, moving southwest and then west northwest during Tuesday, skims over the northernmost leewards and Virgin Islands, passes just north of Puerto Rico. The center is offshore enough, has tropical storm winds, force winds close to the north coast. Also close to the north coast of the Dominican Republic, but the center is clearly out over the water, rakes it through the Bahamas, and the motion continues west-northwest through this period. So we're now west of 75 west. It gets it up to the northwestern Bahamas. So now here we begin the influence of what's going on in southeastern Canada. It actually moves it north-northeast at this point, away from the Florida coast. But then it hooks it northward as that upper trough lifts out and moves it north, and then starts that northwestern hook around as it moves into the Carolinas. So the GFS is still relatively consistent, but we can see where these players are that are exerting an influence. And I'll show you the European's view. The European actually takes a good part of the hurricane over most of the Leeward Islands, so it's still the furthest south of all the models in the let's call inside the 5-day period. Skims it, takes it right across, just over or just north of the Virgin Islands, just north of Puerto Rico, has the circulation touching the north coast of the Dominican Republic, plows it through the Bahamas on a west-northwest course. So at least through this standpoint, the models are fairly consistent. You can see that the European also spins up the next tropical storm, but we're not going to really pay too much attention to that until we can get this first issue out of the way. And then into the northwest Bahamas, gets it very close to the Florida coast, and then because of what's going on to the north, starts to pull it up northeastward, east of the GFS's position. Actually, the models are very similar up. They start to diverge a little bit, but they're not that far away. And notice that Jose is kind of caught up in everything that's going on to the west and gets lifted up with it, if that is Jose, and if it does exist. And then from there, because again of what's going on to the northeast of it, the European, instead of hooking it back around the upper low to the west, pulls it to the northeast. This is actually, now that I look at this isn't that different from Joaquin. If by developing this system, that might be, there might be some kind of, the weakness here might be getting exaggerated a bit by the presence of this tropical this tropical storm that it has. It really isn't that different. So another fly in the ointment, another variable in this long equation that we are looking at. And I'm going to switch it off and take some of your questions. We'll do a little Q&A, so just stand by. I'm getting a little bit faster with these switches. Just let me know if if there's a problem with the audio, okay? But I think I took care of that. Okay, so it's funny because while I was doing the analysis and I'm going through the maps, I saw that when I saw what the European did, it suddenly dawned on me. It really sets up in many ways the same way it did with Hurricane Joaquin a few years ago, which was a Category 5 hurricane that got to the Bahamas, and it had this upper low to the west-northwest that when you looked at it, it said it should have rotated up and around it. But there was the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida, and that was well to the northeast of Joaquin. And you never thought that was going to be a problem. And then that was the time, if you might remember, that was the storm where all the models were pointing northwest and the European was the only one pointing northeast, and that wound up being correct. So when I saw that surface, it suddenly dawned on me, it looks like the same thing all over again. In which case, you can take this as far west as it can get, and then it'll turn north and then northeastward. Now, it doesn't mean that it's right. There's a couple of problems with the European solution. First of all, not everything happens exactly the same way. So there's no guarantee that that's going to happen that way. You know, when I look at the GFS really has a weak system that is, you know, Jose, but it never brings it up as a separate entity like the European does. It just basically absorbs. Irma absorbs it all, so it's not a player. And in fact, the European has the system that would be Tropical Storm Jose already east-northeast of Irma at 168 hours, if I remember correctly. I'm looking at the maps now while I'm talking to you. Well, at least straight to the east of Irma, you have Jose at 168 hours, and they kind of move up together. So I wonder, you know, maybe I'm overplaying it in terms of its impact, but it's out there, so I think we have to consider that possibility. You saw what the late afternoon GFS run did. It did maybe a slight shift to the east. And again, the European and the GFS are not that far apart at that particular point. It's just that the GFS hooks it one way and the European hooks it another way. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays. In the short range, we have that hurricane watch up for the Leeward Islands now. And folks in the Virgin Islands, if you're watching, or in Puerto Rico, on the North Shore of Puerto Rico, you might want to pay extra close attention to what Irma does going forward. I'm not, you know, as far as these pressures are concerned, the GFS continues to show this incredible Category 5 hurricane off the southeast coast. I mean, I think the pressure numbers are out of line. There's some kind of feedback issues going on. But if we adjust it even by 30 millibars, you still, which is a huge adjustment, you still wind up with a Category 4, borderline Category 5, or even a Category 5 hurricane. So just beware of that. And, you know, we are still in the process of just watching and seeing how this evolves step by step. Okay? There's no threat to the U.S. East Coast anytime in the reasonable future. We still have days to watch to see, you know, where and if an ultimate threat develops. In the meantime, we're just going to keep having fun watching it. So it's just not a bad thing. All right, folks. I hope you had a great Sunday. Got your Labor Day holiday. Make sure you take some time and enjoy yourself, especially if where you are the weather is nice. We're planning to have a nice sunny day here tomorrow. Temperature's back into the 80s, so it should be a pretty good beach day. And if you want to stretch it out to Tuesday around here, it'll also be a pretty good beach day. All right, have a great rest of your evening. There's no Game of Thrones tonight, and we'll talk to you soon.